First off, I'm really excited to be here. Like doing these sort of things, talking to young people about my experiences. What I did want to say though is like today's talk isn't necessarily do X, Y, and Z and you'll be successful in entrepreneurship. It's mainly my story and where I came from and the things that I experienced as I went to Indiana State and then to grad school and then starting companies and then starting a family. So that's the story and that's the background that leads to entrepreneurship. And the other thing I want to make a very big point of is, you know, looking back now at 58 years old, I know I was very fortunate, right? And the key here is you need to be ready when those opportunities and when the fortunate times come to take advantage of them. That's one thing I'm going to try and I guess get across today that the people in my life helped me do that and support me in doing that to have some sort of success in entrepreneurship, which we'll end up at. Bailey, I'm ready to go.
Awesome. So going into your background a little bit, you grew up in a small town in Indiana, Huntingtonburg, I believe.
Huntingburg.
How did that shape you?
So Huntingburg, small rural town in southern Indiana. When I was growing up, the population was about 5,000. Norman Rockwellian, right? Everybody knew everybody. Everybody was in everybody's business. But that sort of mentality also creates accountability, right? If you did something wrong, someone would see it, call your parents, and it would get taken care of. So that was really the perfect setting to develop this sense of accountability where you could be free and ride your bike wherever you wanted to, but know that someone was always looking after you or looking at you, depending on the situation. Now, the other thing to note about Huntingburg and about my background is sports were central figure. And in fact, in the 50s, there were such sports and basketball in particular was such a big thing that my town built a high school gymnasium that seated double the number of people in the town. So at that time, there were 3,000 people in Huntingburg, and they built a gym that seated over 6,000. So it gives you an idea of how sports permeated the town and actually how it drew me in and taught me some of my first lessons. Basically, the typical stuff about working hard, but one thing that it taught me very early was how your future can change instantly. See, I had a dream of being a Division I quarterback and had some opportunities there. And one October of my senior year, I broke my leg. And literally all the recruiters stopped calling me instantly. I was scheduled to go to Northwestern the next day, never heard from them again. And that experience sort of showed me that no matter what your plans are, something can change them and you need to be adaptable. And I think the other thing I want to point out is for many people in my kind of situation, growing up in a small town, and being in sports, you have this opportunity that you can become a big fish in a small pond, and that's great, and you can live the rest of your life comfortably, or you can decide to go look for bigger ponds, right, to see what other kind of growth is out there. And I was fortunate that the people in my town, my parents and my mentors there, definitely encouraged me to look for what was next, even though, I had this kind of setback in high school about that kind of derailed where I thought my life was going to go.
Awesome. Yeah. So moving from Indiana State, where you did your undergrad, to Carnegie Mellon, where you did your graduate school, you got your PhD. It's kind of a big leap. How did that process work for you?
So about my junior year in college, I played football at Indiana State, and it became obvious I wasn't going to go to the NFL. So it's like, okay, now what? What's next? And I guess I felt like I had some unfinished business on the academic side. And I had an incredible professor there, Dr. Jerry Cockrell, who said, hey, have you ever thought about grad school? And he encouraged me to start looking for opportunities there. Now, the crazy thing is, and I don't know the exact ages of everybody that's chimed in, but back in the day on the bulletin board in the department, there would be flyers that had these tear off tabs that you'd pull off with a phone number you'd call to get the application for grad school. So I did that. I applied to University of Florida, University of Michigan, and Carnegie Mellon. That was the inverse order of what I thought I could get into. I had a future sister-in-law who lived in Gainesville, so Florida was nice. We had football friends that lived in Ann Arbor, so Michigan was nice, and we knew absolutely no one in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon. So, it would have been nice, I was thinking, to get into Carnegie Mellon, but there'd be a lot of decisions to make going there. Now, having said that, when I applied, I put 4 words on my application in terms of what my interests were. And the words were robotics and computer vision. That was it, nothing more. Turns out when that got to Carnegie Mellon, a professor there named Takeo Kanade, who was the head of the Robotics Institute, saw those words. And I kid you not, literally saw that what I had done in college was a quarterback on the football team. Now, Takeo was Japanese, and he asked some of his American colleagues, like, aren't quarterbacks supposed to be kind of smart? Don't they have to know a lot about football to play that position? And they said, yeah. So Takeo ended up calling me, and he basically said, hey, I'm Takeo. Would you like to come to the Robotics Institute? I'm like, well, let me talk to my parents and my fiance, and I'll get back to you. He goes, okay. And let me back up. Now, remember, there's no internet at these days, all right? There's no emails. There's no cell phones. There's none of that. So he says, well, that's great. And I can kind of barely understand his English. And he says, that's great, but I need to know by tomorrow morning because I'm going to Japan for 3 weeks, and I need to get your application pushed through. So basically, overnight, I call my parents, my fiance, other mentors, say, what should I do? What should I do? And they gave me advice, and basically made the decision that night with pretty incomplete information, having never been to Pittsburgh, to call them back and say, yeah, I'll come to Carnegie Mellon. And that sort of decision with very incomplete information was, one of the best and biggest decisions of my life.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm not a robotic expert by any means, but I know Carnegie Mellon has, I believe, one of the top programs in the world. What was it like walking in from, obviously maybe not a lot of background on what it is, but never been to Pittsburgh, walking into a new place and one of the top, programs in the world?
Incredibly intimidating and huge amount of imposter syndrome. Like, what am I doing here? Kind of idea. So to give you an idea, the first class there had people from Stanford, MIT, all the big name universities, not only in the US, but across the world. And everyone had an accent. And I was this kid from Southern Indiana that literally had never been exposed, barely been exposed to minorities, and certainly never been exposed to people from outside the country. So it was very, very hard initially. Now, having said that, you can gain confidence from having success in those situations. Being this, the least capable or least pedigreed person in the room isn't always a bug. Sometimes it's a feature, right? To make, you realize, look, if I don't work hard, this isn't going to work out well for me. And for people with pride and self-respect, they want to do the best they can. So for me, it was hard, but worth it. And I want to say something here that I'm going to come back to throughout the talk. In the summer between when I graduated from Indiana State and when I went to Carnegie Mellon, I got married. And, that was hard on my wife, Barb, as well, right? We had no money. I'm pretty much grumpy all the time because I don't know what the heck's going on. I'm trying to learn. We have no family. We have literally no friends in a city we didn't know. So a lot of things about that time were very hard, but also a lot of things, again, set a foundation and a path, if you could just get through them, to what came next.
Awesome. Yeah. I think switching into what you would probably call like one of the defining projects of your work, No Hands Across America. Tell us
Yep.
about that, what it is, and why you did it.
So at Carnegie Mellon, I was in the Vision and Autonomous Systems Center, and specifically part of the NAV Lab group. And we built software that made cars drive by themselves, essentially. Um, I got there in 1990. From 90 to 95 was an inflection point in the capabilities of these vehicles, meaning they could drive maybe 5 miles per hour on a paved path in a park, to being able to drive more or less indistinguishable from a human on highways at highway speeds, 55, 60, 75 miles an hour. 1995, my thesis advisor and I created a system called NavLab 5, and my thesis advisor had a self-driving or a piece of software that looked at the road in front of the vehicle and controlled the steering wheel, and it was really good at what it did. The catch was we could only test it around Pittsburgh. Um, you know, that's our home base. You could drive maybe an hour in every direction on the interstates and get testing, but the world's a lot bigger than Pittsburgh, and we knew we wanted to test it in a larger area, and the only way that we thought to do that was to drive on more types of roads, and that's where No Hands Across America came into being. And it was sort of a spin-off of Hands Across America, which was like a farm aid thing to raise money for farmers at that time. Anyway, built this vehicle. I was more in charge of the hardware. Dean, my thesis advisor at that point, was in charge of the software. And it drove from Washington, D.C. to San Diego, California, about 2,850 miles, all but about 50 miles, which was, I don't know, 98% of the trip. Steering only. But the big but there is, that was about 15, 17 years before Tesla ever did anything. 20 years before you could buy these things widespread on cars. And to date myself, that was 30 years ago, 31 years ago, right now that we had driven across the country, which is sort of crazy when I look back on it. The thing here that's interesting that sort of starts to lead my path into entrepreneurship is, we never wrote an academic paper about any of those systems. We wrote papers that kind of described it at the high level, but the point wasn't to, get another paper to get tenure. The point was to prove we could do it. It wasn't perfect. It failed 50 miles of the trip, which is, that's completely, you couldn't do that today. But we learned so much and was able to make the system so much better because of that. And the analogy I wrote down for everybody out there, it's like talking about how to swim versus jumping in the lake to really learn how. And that's what we did. We said, look, we're going to do it. We're going to take this step. We're going to jump in and we're going to solve everything as we go. And that trip was sort of a turning point in, my mentality about, what you can accomplish if you just take that first step.
Yeah, awesome. And I think moving into like making a leap, taking that first step after you left Carnegie Mellon, you started your first company, Assistware, baby
Yep.
on the way, freshly married, like you had mentioned earlier. Maybe not a lot of savings, where most people would say, probably take a safe 9 to 5. You started your own company. What went into that thought process?
So after No Hands Across America and later the automated highway system, a couple things happened. The kind of fundamental thing, the forcing function in some respects, was our funding from the Department of Transportation had dried up. We had done a great job with this, and they said, probably rightfully so, well, why is the government funding this? This doesn't look like research. Companies, General Motors, Delphi, Ford, you guys go take it on. This isn't something the government needs to fund anymore. So obviously we weren't going to get to do fun stuff and cool stuff at Carnegie Mellon as much anymore. The second thing that was more personal was I sort of felt like I accomplished everything I set out to accomplish at Carnegie Mellon. I went there to get a PhD, finished my academic career. I never had any intention of being a professor. There weren't exactly a ton of jobs for people developing self-driving cars then. So it felt like, well, all right, maybe the next step is to try and do this on our own. And the note I wrote here was, you never feel ready. And in fact, the most scared you are is the moment before you take that leap. But once we took the leap, and the leap was essentially to take what the technology that controlled the steering wheel and turn it into a drowsy driver warning system for heavy trucks. Once we took that leap and committed to developing that product, then it became easy. Then taking the next step after that, even though we only had 1 year of funding, I had a baby on the way, had a mortgage had to pay for, my wife was staying at home with the kids. It felt like that was the way to go, because I had accomplished what I wanted to, and everything I wanted, all my goals in life were still in front of me. Now, having said that, I think for the people considering entrepreneurship, some practical things to know. One, we had no venture capital funding or no outside funding whatsoever. Dean and I weren't independently wealthy. We couldn't fund this ourselves. We had to scramble for contracts, but we decided it was worth doing. The other thing that happened was we had the opportunity at that time to bring in outside money, and we turned it down because the terms weren't right or whatever. So, sort of a non-traditional by the situation type of entrepreneurship. No one was going to fund, I don't think anyone was going to fund this 30 years ago anyway. So we were sort of on our own to do this, I guess, the old-fashioned way. And again, once we started, we sort of, made our way through it, even though neither one of us were kind of business people to begin with. We just learned what we needed to do. And that's something that process taught me a lot.
Yeah. You talk, and for those of you who don't know, that Todd has written a couple books. I just dropped the link in the chat here, and in your books, you talk a lot about failure. And you mentioned a couple there, from turning down the grant, that probably would have been helpful, to some SBIR rejections. How do you process failure?
So the first thing is I always think I'm going to get the question, all right, what's your biggest failure? And I literally don't remember. Like, my mental model is to, okay, didn't work, put that out of my mind, keep moving forward. And I think certainly in business, that's how I operate it. Like, and maybe a little bit was a chip on my shoulder, right? Like, well, they screwed up in not funding us. They screwed up in not buying this. But really, just put it behind me and keep moving forward. The other thing, and this is cliche, but it's true, you don't really fail unless you stop, right? That's the only failure. And my kids get so mad at me because I'm constantly sending them these little pictures and snippets from Instagram and elsewhere that say things like, there's no failure. The only failure is not starting. So all those failures after we started didn't really count. They were things that just were lessons. And, I hate to be that cliche, but it actually is true. To go back to an analogy I wrote down here from my sports background, is it's like you're a quarterback on a football team, but you're afraid to pass the ball. But if you never pass it, you can never succeed. So you can't be so afraid of failing, so afraid of what other people, and this is what it is this day and age, right? With social media and everybody seeing you. You can't be so afraid of what other people are going to think about your failure that you're afraid to start, right? Those other people don't matter. And I get I'm a different demographic than the social media generation. The documentation culture is so much I call it. But what other people think doesn't matter. Don't be afraid. Dare to be great. Don't be afraid to fail. Go out there and try this stuff, and you'll learn from it.
Absolutely. Most people, I think, would think, you have your one business that's running, and that's probably enough. from what we've learned, that wasn't the case for you.
Yeah.
While Assistware was starting, you started a second company, Applied Perception. Why did you decide to take another gamble, if you will?
So, little context. So, Assistware was focused on self-driving car technology, and Applied Perception was focused on developing software to make military robots smart. And an opportunity came up in that space. And I think one of the reasons that we went that direction and that I took this on was because the first company wasn't really my baby. The first company was my thesis advisor who became my business partner. It was his software. It was his baby. He was leading the charge. This was an opportunity for me to take all the stuff I applied and kind of build something that I wanted to build to get to the outcome I wanted and to build it in a way I wanted to build it, which was I wanted to build it like a business version of Carnegie Mellon, where you have these incredibly smart people doing real world things, all working together. And the other thing that I really believe in, again, another cliche, you got to hire people that are smarter than you in almost every area. We had 6 CMU PhDs, more than any other company in the world working for us. And these people literally were some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life, way smarter than I ever was. The key, the thing that I kind of changed up then that I think was a great idea was I let them share in the success. If they brought in contracts, they got part of the profits. There was no equity to distribute in the beginning. There was equity to distribute at the end when we sold, and they shared in that. They had great freedom. I generally let them do what they wanted to do, but they also had great accountability, right? Now, certainly there was accountability monetarily, but also there was accountability to bring in additional projects. If you're going to treat them like adults, and they have to behave like adults. And the guys and ladies that I hired were all of that ilk. The second thing here I want to point out, and this actually wasn't in the talk my notes, but I wanted to bring this up. We're in a fraternity. It's a bunch of guys. If you're in engineering, it's usually a bunch of guys. The company that I created had both men, mostly men, but also women from every race and religion and nationality and background. And I strongly, strongly believe that made us better and enabled us to be incredibly better thinkers. Now, yes, it was all about technology, but when you see these different viewpoints, when you understand perspectives that other people bring because of their upbringing, I think that opens your mind up in ways that are more than just social. It opens your mind up in every way. So I really encourage everybody here that if you are going down the entrepreneurial path, or even in your current jobs, reach out to those people that have different backgrounds from you, because you'll learn so much from them, and that'll end up making you sort of a better person and a better leader, I think.
Yeah. For those of you who joined kind of after we got started, we're at the midway point here. We're asking questions, Todd's answering them. If you have any questions, feel free to toss them in the chat or in the Q&A feature, and we can get those answered. But continuing on, you mentioned in the middle of your last remark there about both of your companies selling,
Yep.
I believe to the same company. How did you know it was time to sell?
So I want to talk specifically about Applied Perception because more detail there, and that was the company that I was running at that point. So let me give you context. About the time most people here were being born, there was something called the dot-com bubble, and companies were selling for billions of dollars based on how many people would click on their website. So that was the context. And I guess you could say that would have been perfection, right? To sell for $1 billion. That's not what drove me to sell. What drove me to sell was kind of two things. One, I kind of recognized my limits and what I wanted to do. We had grown to about 18 people. It became obvious to me that to keep growing, we were going to have to add things that I didn't want to add. There was going to be management layers. There's going to be bureaucracy. And the other part of it is that I didn't want was there was going to be a lot more pressure. it wasn't just 18 people. It was probably 30 people that, as the founder and CEO and president, whatever, you're responsible for those people. And at least I felt responsible. And that was a responsibility that was more daunting, particularly as my family was growing. So with those things in mind, basically set out to try and sell the companies, and was successful in doing that in 2007. It wasn't even close to $1 billion. It wasn't even a not 8-figure exit, all right, but it was enough. And that's the key that I want to get across here. When I started these companies, the goal was never $1 billion. The goal was to have enough to let me retire, to provide for my family for the next 20, 30, 40 years, whatever that may be, not to buy the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? It was to have enough. And the thing that I see now a lot, and this was my generation, it's your generation, is that people don't know what enough is. People judge enough by what they see on their screen or what they saw in the Wall Street Journal in the old days. I think everyone needs to define their enough and what it is for them. Yeah, for some people, it may be to own the Pittsburgh Steelers. For other people, it may be to have enough money to quit for a year and travel the world. For me, it was to have enough money to provide for my family. And the key thing there isn't what you pick, it's that you pick, and that you don't let the external world or other people decide what is your enough. So the main thing about selling, of course, money was great, but it also was defining the endpoint and defining what was enough for me. And that, I think, is carried forward for everything in my life after that.
Absolutely. We talked a lot about your credentials. You have a PhD, founded a couple companies, the Army SBIR program, which are great. But what do you view as the role of credentials versus that real world grit?
So I'll start off by saying the best 6 letters in the alphabet are CMU PhD. Okay, best 6 letters. And I value those credentials greatly. Now, having said that, those credentials will get you a little bit of ways. They'll open doors for you. They'll get you the first contract. But particularly for young people, your most important credential is your ability to be accountable and to deliver on your word. And I don't care if it's the small thing like, sending an email by the close of the day, or a big thing like, finishing your thesis when you say you're going to finish. It doesn't matter. But your word is your biggest credential after you get your foot in the door. Some people are going to have to work a lot harder to get your foot in the door. Others, it'll be easier because of the credential society assigns. And it's funny, my son, basically smart kid, got a lot of credentials, but didn't understand why they were important, because it seems like they're just kind of manufactured. And to some extent they are. And I think what I tried to get across to him, and I want to get across to the people here, is yes, they're important to get your foot in the door, but grit, which I think people are realizing now is actually a quantifiable thing. The ability to keep going, to deliver on time, to keep your word, not only to others, but also to yourself. And for some things I'm great at that. For other things I'm still not good at, but I think I'm pretty good at, if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do something. And I think for everyone here, that's probably the most important thing you can take away from the idea of grit. Be accountable to yourself. And if you can do that, then you can actually have a chance of moving forward and being accountable to others, like your family or your coworkers or society in general, to be a good person, that kind of thing. So I know that got a little bit, soft from a credentials thing, but I really believe that is what you want to get after you get past I have these letters after my name. That's what you want to get to be successful in life.
Absolutely. Moving on to, you talked about relationships earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Your mentors you had, your thesis advisor. I know we haven't talked about him too much, but your fraternity advisor, Ed Pease, who any Indiana State guys know who that is. How How do you go about building those relationships with mentors or anyone else?
So, I think one thing to keep in mind is, or I want to start with is, I was a first generation college student. My grandparents lived on farms in southern Indiana. Mom and dad didn't go to college. In fact, my dad didn't even speak English till he got into grade school. Um, so, beginning then, I had mentors with my parents in the community about what hard work looks like, what accountability looks like. In high school, my calc and physics teacher went to Ohio State, and on the side, he was still a full-time farmer. So it all started to come together then. At Indiana State, Jerry Cockrell, who was my professor, um, saw something in me and pushed me forward. And then Ed Pease, who was really the first role model and example I had of someone who was the next, I don't say next step up, but he was a second generation college student, and I saw what he had taken advantage of in the real world. He went to the big school. He went to Indiana University, not Indiana State, right? He did that. He became a politician. And I don't want to talk about politics now because politics back then and now are very different, but he put his beliefs out there for other people to criticize and in many respects view him as a failure because he believed what he believed. Not because he was, but because was externally what people thought. So those sorts of role models were always there for me to push me forward. So the other side of that, and because I don't want to make it seem like it was all passive, the other side of that was I kind of put myself out there too. I mean, I wanted to learn. I wanted to see what was next. I wanted to do all of these things, and I was young. I didn't know, and these people that I mentioned saw that, and it's the classic took you under their wing and taught you stuff, and were available for you in a way that was right for you, and let you grow, let you fail. You'd hear the tisk tisk from Ed or from Dr. Cockrell or from my parents when you did something wrong that they knew you were going to do wrong, right? They knew it. They saw it coming, but they let you do it and let you grow. So they were incredibly powerful for me. And it's, in fact, in my books, I talk a lot more detail about that. But those are the sorts of people you need to find. And then the challenge I'm going to give everyone here is not only do you have to find those people, but you have to be that person. I'm guessing everyone here is at least 19 to 40 or maybe a little bit older, a little bit younger maybe, but there are people you can mentor now. There are students in your fraternity that, whether it has to, and this is going to get sensitive topics, whether it has to do with alcohol or women or drugs, you can model the right behavior for them if they're going down the wrong path, right? In the business world, you can model being accountable, putting the work in. And the last thing, in relationships, you can model what it takes to be a good, boyfriend, fiance, husband, father, son as your parents get older. And those are the things I want to encourage everybody here to not put off, to start now. And you have the perfect opportunity in the fraternity to do that.
We had a question from the crowd here before we keep going. They asked if you're still involved with AI, robotics, in the defense sector field at all.
So I'm trying to be, but the big but is after I sold the companies, I became a high school football coach for 15 years and sort of got away from that, found a new passion. I'm getting more and more into it with the, self-driving cars are everywhere now. I used Claude to create this talk. I use ChatGPT and Claude to write my books, to edit them. So I would say I am a power user almost, but I wouldn't say I'm anywhere near capable of writing software anymore to impact those things.
Awesome.
Yeah.
At the end there, you mentioned your family. You mentioned being a
Yeah.
husband, father, and I know that Barb is your wife is a
Yep.
big part of your life. She's a co-author on the books, I believe.
Yep.
marrying young, having kids while building companies, how does, and I think this could apply to people who aren't in entrepreneurship, how does family and entrepreneurship for you specifically, but work-life balance, I guess, coexist together?
Yeah. So the number one decision every man in here is going to make is decide who your partner is. All right. By far, none of the other stuff matters. It's who you decide to spend the rest of your life with is the most important decision you're going to make. Um, for people that know us, Barb and I are exactly the opposite. I'm type A, pesty, pain in the butt, impatient, all that stuff. She is classic type B. She's kind, she's caring, she's patient, all of those things. But from the very beginning, she always encouraged me. I was never fighting the battle at work and the battle at home. Whatever I wanted to do, she wanted me to be happy to reach my potential, and she supported me in that. And that was going to grad school, a place we had never been. We had no family or friends here. Starting two companies with, I would say a nice way to say it would be indeterminate future in that, knowing there was good possibility of instability in the future. She always just said, go for it. I trust you. Now, sometimes that puts a lot of pressure on you, right? But knowing that you have a non-judgmental backstop there is incredible. And having said that, she also knew eyes wide open going in, what it was going to be like. She had known me. We grew up together. We had dated for 4 years. She knew all of my bad traits and good traits. So she knew what the ride was going to be like. But entrepreneurship takes a toll on your family. You got to decide. And I read this the other day. There's 4 things. You have work, you have family, you have friends, and you have your health. You can do 2 of those well. All right. When I was young, it was work and family. Health wasn't in that when it was your age, Bailey, and probably a lot of the people's ages on here. Now it's changed a lot. Those things are gone, and health and family are the 2 things I spend by far the most time and the most money on, by far, to try and get back what I almost lost. So I think there's an honesty with yourself and those around you if you want to go down this entrepreneurship route in particular. But also in any job, you have to pick the right person to get to the goals you want in life, because it's a lot easier if you've got someone in your corner than trying to do it alone, right? If you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go with somebody else. It's cliche, but it's true.
Awesome. If you could go back to 22-year-old Todd, or anyone, starting out, what would you wish someone had told you at that age or that early stage in your life?
Yeah, so I wrote these down because I want to get these right. I think the number one thing, you don't need a perfect plan. All right, in fact, you're not going to have a perfect plan. And in many times, you don't need a plan past what the next step is. The key with all this is just take the next step. All right. Lots of lives have been, I don't want to say wasted, but have gone by waiting for the perfect moment to take the next step. And it's funny. There's a quote by Thoreau, and I hope Ed's not on here because I know I'm getting this wrong, and he was an English major and he'd correct me. But it's about most men live lives of quiet desperation, meaning they know what they want in life, but they're afraid to go for it. And that's something I didn't want. And I don't want anybody in here to want that either. I want you guys to have the broadest, most full life you can have. But part of getting there is going to be doing things that scare you, because they're going to be uncomfortable. They're going to be risky. But I think what I want you guys to hear at 22 and 23 years old is, the risk really is getting to be my age and skipping the 30 years in between and not really living and having the opportunity to create your full self during that time, because you never, ever know where you're going to end up. If you were to tell the 22-year-old me at Indiana State that you were going to drive a car across the country, you were going to coach these football teams, you're going to have these 3 kids, this wonderful wife, this life, I would have said, get out of here. That's never going to happen. But it all was possible because I took the next step and, dared to do something that had no definitive outcome, that was risky. So that's what I tell myself today.
Yeah, and I think we've mentioned this earlier, and it's in the chat for those of you who didn't see it earlier, but you've started to write some books about your life. Why did you decide to, take on like a multi-book writing process, and like what do you hope people take away from those writings?
Yeah, so I always wanted to write, but it was just too hard, right? And I'm sure people know this: editing, coming up with the stories, writing them all down, even the physically typing it all. Now using AI makes that possible, so I had this opportunity. But the real reason I wanted to write, and this is selfish, I'm closer to the end than the beginning, right? And my kids, they didn't know the first 35 years of they were babies. They didn't know those first 35 years of my life. So it was the idea to get all that stuff down and to get my beliefs and what helped me and what I did and what I failed at down on a piece of paper for them to read and them to understand my life. So it was selfish, right? It was legacy driven. Now, having said that, I think there's a lot of good lessons in those books about everything we've talked about today. How to cope in grad school. How to define success there. Entrepreneurship, choosing enough. The next book I'm actually working on now is, the story of when I was at Huntingburg and growing up. And the one after that's going to be about that fun time of having teenagers and going through, quote, midlife crisis when, I stopped being an entrepreneur and what do I do next? And I hope there's going to be another book about how I'm a grandfather and what true legacy really means, when you can literally see, have an idea what the end looks like. So, that's where, that's why I'm writing these books for myself, and hopefully maybe other people get something out of them too.
Absolutely. I'm going to make a final call here. We're at 45 minutes, so we only have a little bit of time left. So if you do have a question that you'd like asked, feel free to toss it in the chat and we can get it answered here as we close up shop. But a few more questions for you here, Todd. And
Sure.
This one was in the chat. If you have like a book, a habit, piece of advice, like what is one thing that you would recommend to people to like move the needle on advancing themselves?
If you're thinking about doing something, do it. Right? If there's a risk, and I'm not talking stupid risk. I'm talking about calculated risk where there's an upside and a downside. Take the risk and go for it. If nothing else, you're going to get information. And a lot of people, people my age say, oh, well, if you take a risk and you buy a house, what happens if the market crashes? And they get paralyzed by fear. What happens in the case of the kids here? What happens if another opportunity comes along for a better job? So that's easy to say that. What I always want to say then, well, what happens if it doesn't? You're stuck. You've made no progress. What happens if you take this risk and another opportunity comes along because of that? So my advice there, and I don't know what the context is, but if there's a risk that you feel could have some opportunity for you, take it. Take it. All the people in here are young enough where if it's the wrong decision, I'm sure it's not fatal. You can come back from it. But I think the upside of taking risks is way, way greater than doing nothing.
Yeah. Do you have any like books or specific resources you would recommend for people, maybe on that topic or on any other topic?
I've never really read any of the 5 steps to be great or secret habits or whatever. I've read autobiographies and I like to see how people led. Mostly sports ones. Tony Dungy was one. Some, that are more kind of cross between sports and other things that I can't think of any right now. So I liked reading those. The other thing I like to read that really opens my mind to thinking differently is just fiction. You could pick whatever fiction you like, but I like science fiction. I like war and or things about that. And I think those sorts of things get you in a mindset of learning other people's perspective without being emotionally bound to it. You can kind of objectively look at it and say, oh, I see what they meant. How would that affect my life? I saw a question come up about what's my favorite autobiography. I wish I could answer that. I don't even remember all the ones I've written. I'll tell you this though. There's two that I want to read. I want to read about Steve Jobs because I think he thought completely differently. And I want to read about Elon Musk because, throw out his politics. He is, I believe, almost like a Leonardo da Vinci of our time in terms of his mindset, his ability to do engineering. I don't think he's that much smarter than all of us, but I think he has something that lets people follow him and see insights that the rest of us don't see. So Jobs and Elon Musk, and I know those are both technical, but those are the ones that I'd want to read and that I will read eventually.
And you also mentioned Tony Dungy, maybe a little Colts, Indiana bias there, but I've also read that one. It's pretty good. Got a question from Ethan on grad school. Do you have any advice for people working on personal statements or essays for their grad school applications?
So I would say this: competition is incredibly high now. I sat on one of the grad school admissions committees a few years, and I'm like, thank God I went to grad school when I did because I couldn't get in now. It's ridiculous. So to answer your question, though, I would say be as honest and I'll say soul-bearing as you can be. If you have weaknesses or made mistakes, admit them and talk about what you've learned from them. Everybody that submits is going to be talking about how great they are. I guarantee it. How great they are. They're going to embellish things. To stand out, I think it's to demonstrate that next layer of maturity. If everyone's great, all right, well, if you're in grad school, you're going to fail. How are you going to recover from that? Because you're in a cohort now that's a lot smarter and the bar's a lot higher. So I would say be blatantly honest about your situation, your strengths, your weaknesses, what you think you have to offer, and how you think you can fit in and make their situation, their program better.
Awesome. Another question we got here. What's the biggest thing you learned about yourself while building your career and your time as a football coach?
That I am, let's see how to put this. I have a lot of flaws that are very positive in a entrepreneurial and business world that can be very negative in an interpersonal relationship world, particularly family oriented, right? The expectations you have for your employees aren't the expectations you should have for your children, right? That you need to be different. And it took me literally 20 years to figure that out. And I'm still learning. I learn more from my kids and how they think than I think I've ever learned from other people, just because their perspective is different, and I learn from that. I think, though, the entrepreneurship to football coaching thing is a little bit closer. And I'm glad this question was asked. Somehow in our society, the word win has become a negative thing, right? Particularly in sports. When I coached football, it was the same as entrepreneurship. Our goal was to win, and we were going to build a program to win. And there's a lot of academics now, particularly, these bubble school districts, these upper middle class school districts where, it's about education, it's about academics, sports and winning needs to take second fiddle. Well, I guarantee you that no one has ever said, I know no one's ever said, hey, don't win in sports. I guarantee you no one said, hey, you know what? In your relationship with your wife, just be average. You don't need to be great at it. You don't need to win. That's stupid. All right, at work, you know what? Go home at 4:30. Don't do your best. In your interpersonal relationships with other people, don't worry about it. You know what? Don't try to be your best. Has a teacher ever said, you know what, that C is good enough? You don't need to work for an A, even if you have the ability. So I think what it's taught me is not only that I'm really flawed and I'm continuing to work on that, but also a lot of the things in entrepreneurship carry over into life if you let them, in terms of striving and succeeding and trying to win. There's a lot of commonality there, and that's what I hope young people understand. There's nothing wrong with winning. It's not a four-letter word.
Yeah. I think this will probably be our last question here. What was the biggest mistake you made as an entrepreneur, and would you make it again?
So I think, now this is a delicate answer. I think that having partners is hard, right? In life, it's hard. In business, it's hard. In life, your wife, you have this commitment, you have this thing called love that keeps you together, keeps you moving forward, and keeps you growing. In business, you don't have that. And if your interests diverge from your partners, which they will, that's natural, and the organization is your livelihood, then it gets hard. So I would again think hard about having partners in entrepreneurship. Other decisions, well, and let me back up because this is being recorded. I love my partners. They were great, but in some respects, I wanted to be in charge and I wanted to be in control of my destiny. And maybe that's what it is. It's not that you don't like the direction other people are going. It's just that your destiny is yours, and when there's other people involved, then it's hard. It's impossible to reconcile because you can't change another person. So that's one caution I would give you. All the other stuff just is noise that just went away. And yeah, I made mistakes. We should have taken this contract. We should have wrote something this way. We shouldn't have hired this guy because we had to fire him. But that's all noise under the bridge.
Awesome. Well, Todd, we really appreciate your time and everything you've shared here. Before we go, I want to shameless plug here for the Pike Network. This is the fourth session we've hosted and one of our best so far. But all of the sessions that we host here are recorded. And if you sign up under the Pike Network, go to the resources tab. There's links to every session we've hosted so far. And that's where you can also find the ones we plan to host in the future. If you have an idea for a topic, there's something you want to hear, feel free to message me on there and let me know so that I can try to schedule someone that, meets the needs of what you guys are looking for. But Todd, we really appreciate you. Any final thoughts for the group?
Yeah, this has been great. Bailey and everybody, thank you so much. And I guess I just close with the theme of my memoir series, which is dare to be great, fellas. Go out there and make it happen.
Awesome. Well, everyone have a great day. Thanks for showing up and stay tuned for the next webinar. Have a great day.